In Oklahoma City, the fall of 1986 was like so many others before it. The air was crisp, the leaves had turned, and families were preparing for the holiday season. On November 21st, in the heart of the city, dozens of people went about their daily routines at the Department of Human Services. Parents filed in with their children, staff carried out their work, and there was no sign that, in just a matter of minutes, the building's parking lot would become the scene of an act so horrifying that it would shock even hardened police officers. That day, a young mother named Lawanna Gail Titsworth, just 24 years old, was gunned down in cold blood in front of her 2 children. The man who pulled the trigger was someone she had once trusted, someone she had once shared her life with, a man who could not accept her leaving him behind. His name was Garry Thomas Allen. Allen's story began decades earlier, and like many men who end up on death row, his life was marked early by trouble. Born in 1956, he grew up in Oklahoma, a boy remembered by some as awkward, withdrawn, and sometimes prone to fits of temper. Teachers recalled a child who struggled to follow rules and seemed to lack direction, someone who could not settle himself even as he reached adolescence. As a young man, Allen drifted through jobs and relationships, never able to root himself in stability. He had brushes with the law, nothing at first that suggested he would become a killer, but enough to set a pattern of poor decisions and disregard for authority. Those who knew him personally described him as manipulative, sometimes charming, but ultimately dangerous when angered. By the time he reached his 30s, Garry Allen had developed a reputation for volatility. He drank heavily, and when he drank, his temper worsened. Women in his life experienced his darker side: jealousy, controlling behavior, and unpredictable outbursts. It was during this turbulent period that he entered into a relationship with Lawanna Gail Titsworth. Lawanna was young, bright, and by all accounts devoted to her 2 small children. Friends remembered her as loving and kind, a woman who wanted more than anything to create a safe, secure life for her family. But her relationship with Allen was far from safe. The couple's connection was unstable, and by 1986, Lawanna had made the decision to leave him behind. She knew his temper, she knew the danger he posed, and she wanted no part of it. But walking away from a man like Garry Allen would prove to be far more difficult and dangerous than she imagined. On November 21st, Lawanna had brought her 6-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter to the Department of Human Services for a routine meeting. It should have been an ordinary day, one of those days that comes and goes without leaving any mark on memory. But Garry Allen had been watching, waiting. He knew she would be there, and he had decided that if he couldn't have her, no one would. He carried a revolver with him, concealed but ready, and when he approached her in that parking lot, the course of dozens of lives changed forever. Witnesses later described the first moments as tense but not immediately violent. Allen confronted Lawanna, speaking in a low, urgent voice. She tried to keep her distance, clutching the hands of her children, who looked up at the man they knew, confused and frightened by his presence. Allen's words grew more heated. His face twisted with rage as she resisted him, as she pulled away and refused to leave with him. People nearby could see the confrontation escalating, but no one could have anticipated how quickly it would turn into horror. Suddenly, Allen pulled the revolver from his pocket. He raised it and fired. The crack of the gunshot rang out across the parking lot, a sound that instantly sent people running for cover. Lawanna staggered, hit by the bullet, but even as she bled, her first instinct was to shield her children. With adrenaline surging, she grabbed their hands and tried desperately to escape, pulling them with her, hoping to find safety inside the building. But Allen was relentless. He pursued her across the lot, closing the distance as panicked screams echoed all around. Witnesses later told police how he looked almost mechanical, determined, his eyes fixed on his target. Lawanna's children cried, their voices carrying across the chaos, pleading for their mother, clinging to her as she stumbled forward. And then Allen fired again. This time the shot was fatal. Lawanna collapsed, her body crumpling onto the pavement. The children screamed, frozen beside her as blood spread across the concrete. In that moment, an ordinary government parking lot became a crime scene, a place where innocence was shattered, and where two young children were forced to watch the most unimaginable act, the murder of their mother at the hands of the man who was supposed to care for her. The scene was pandemonium. People shouted, some tried to approach, others fled in terror. Police were called immediately, and officers swarmed the area within minutes. They found Allen still nearby, armed, but unable to escape. He was subdued and taken into custody, the revolver recovered as evidence. For the officers on the scene, the image of those two children, sobbing over their mother's lifeless body, would be something they carried for the rest of their careers. The case against Allen was as clear as any prosecutor could hope for. Multiple eyewitnesses had seen everything. The murder weapon was in his possession, and the children, though too young to testify, were living proof of what had happened. But the story of Allen's journey through the courts would not be simple. In 1987, Garry Thomas Allen was put on trial for the murder of Lawanna Gail Titsworth. The prosecution laid out a damning case. This was premeditated, cold-blooded murder. Allen had tracked Lawanna down, confronted her, and executed her in front of her children. The defense, however, argued that Allen was not in his right mind. They pointed to his history of mental illness, his erratic behavior, and his supposed inability to fully comprehend his actions. Experts testified about his mental state, debating whether he was delusional, schizophrenic, or otherwise incapable of forming intent, but the jury was unmoved. The evidence was too strong, the crime too brutal. They found Allen guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death. For Lawanna's family, the verdict was some measure of justice, though nothing could erase the pain of losing her in such a cruel way. Yet Allen's story did not end with his conviction. For the next 25 years, his case wound its way through the appeals system. Again and again, his lawyers argued that he was mentally unfit for execution. Psychiatric evaluations became the focal point of his legal battles. Was Garry Allen truly insane, or was he simply a manipulative killer seeking to delay his punishment? Courts wrestled with the question for decades, each ruling bringing new appeals, each scheduled execution halted by last-minute stays. For the family of Lawanna Gail Titsworth, the wait was agonizing. Each time the case resurfaced, they were forced to relive the horror. Each delay felt like an insult, a prolonging of their suffering. They had watched her die, they had buried her, and yet justice seemed forever just out of reach. By 2012, after a quarter of a century of appeals, the courts had reached their final conclusion. Garry Thomas Allen, though troubled, was competent enough to face his sentence. On November 6th of that year, he was led into the execution chamber at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He was 56 years old. Witnesses described him as calm, even detached, as he was strapped to the gurney. When asked if he had any final words, he muttered a few quiet remarks, nothing of substance. No apology, no acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. The lethal injection was administered, and within minutes, Allen was dead. For the first time in 26 years, the case was closed. For Lawanna's family, the execution was not a cause for celebration. It did not erase the trauma, nor did it restore what was lost. But it ended the long chapter of waiting, of courtrooms and appeals, of questions about justice. Her children, who had witnessed her murder as innocents, grew up carrying the weight of that moment. They lived their lives without their mother, haunted by memories no child should ever carry. The story of Garry Thomas Allen is not just the story of a murder. It is the story of domestic violence, of a relationship poisoned by control and jealousy, of a man who could not accept rejection and chose instead to destroy what he could not have. It is the story of a justice system that struggled for decades with the question of mental illness and culpability, and of a family forced to endure that struggle as they sought closure. And it is, above all, the story of Lawanna Gail Titsworth, a young mother who wanted only to raise her children, to build a better life, and who was stolen from them in an act of senseless brutality. Her name, her life, and her memory remain at the heart of this tragedy, a reminder that behind every headline, behind every death row case, there are victims whose lives mattered and whose loss is felt forever.